Hi, kids. Just wanted to let you know I miss you very much. It's been very weird these last, week and a half, and hopefully things will get back to normal in the not too distant future. But in the meantime, I've decided to start reading aloud online, since that seemed to be one of your favorite parts of the day, not counting recess and lunch and other things I didn't actually have anything to do with. Anyhow, so the Neverending Story was what we were reading before, and unfortunately I left it at school and the building is locked and I can't get in without special permission. So instead of worrying about that, I decided to go ahead and read Stardust by Neil Gaiman, who gave his permission for teachers to do read-alouds and whatnot during this oh so crazy time. It's a great book. Hopefully you will enjoy it. But without getting into any more random fluff that I usually hate at the beginning of YouTube videos, I'm just going to start reading. Chapter 1, in which we learn of the village of Wall and the curious thing that occurs there every 9 years. There was a young man who wished to gain his heart's desire, and while that is, as beginnings go, not entirely novel, for every tale about every young man could start in a similar manner, there was much about this young man there ever was or will be, and what happened to him that was unusual, although he never knew the whole of it. The tale started, as many tales have started, in Wall. The town of Wall stands today as it has stood for 600 years on a high jut of granite amidst a small forest woodland. The houses of Wall are square and old, built of grey stone, with dark slate roofs and high chimneys. Taking advantage of every inch of space on the rock, the houses lean into one another, are built one upon the next, with here and there a bush or tree growing out of the side of a building. There is one road from Wall, a winding track rising sharply up from the forest, where it is lined with rocks and small stones. Followed far enough south, out of the forest, the track becomes a real road, paved with asphalt. Followed further, the road gets larger, is packed at all hours with cars and trucks rushing from city to city. Eventually, the road takes you to London, but London is a whole night's drive from Wall. The inhabitants of Wall are taciturn breed, falling into two distinct types. The native Wall folk, as grey and tall and stocky as the granite outcrop their town was built upon, and the others, who have made Wall their home over the years, and their descendants. Below Wall on the west is the forest, to the south is a treacherously placid lake, served by the streams that drop from the hills behind Wall to the north. There are fields upon the hills on which sheep graze. To the east is more woodland. Immediately to the east of Wall is a high grey rock wall, from which the town takes its name. This wall is old, built of rough, square lumps of hewn granite, and it comes from the woods and goes back to the woods once more. There is only one break in the wall, an opening about 6 feet wide, a little to the north of the village. Through the gap in the wall can be seen a large green meadow. Beyond the meadow, a stream, and beyond the stream there are trees. From time to time, shapes and figures can be seen amongst the trees in the distance. Huge shapes and odd shapes and small glimmering things which flash and glitter are gone. Although it is perfectly good meadowland, none of the villagers has ever grazed animals on the meadow on the other side of the wall, nor have they used it for growing crops. Instead, for hundreds, perhaps thousands of years, they have posted guards on either side of the opening on the wall and done their best to put it out of their minds. Even today, 2 townsmen stand on either side of the opening night and day, taking 8-hour shifts. They carry hefty wooden cudgels. They flank the opening on the town side. Their main function is to prevent the town's children from going through the opening, into the meadow and beyond. Occasionally they are called upon to discourage a solitary rambler or one of the few visitors to town from going through the gateway. The children they discourage simply with displays of the cudgel. Where ramblers and visitors are concerned, they are more inventive, only using physical force as a last resort if tales of new planted grass or dangerous bowl on the loose are not sufficient. Very rarely someone comes to Wall knowing what they are looking for, and these people will sometimes allow through. There is a look in the eyes, and once seen it cannot be mistaken. There have been no cases of smuggling across the Wall in all the 20th century that the townfolk know of, and they pride themselves on this. The guard is relaxed once every 9 years on May Day, when a fair comes to the meadow. The events that follow transpired many years ago. Queen Victoria was on the throne of England, but she was not yet the black-clad widow of Windsor. She had apples in her cheeks and a spring in her step, and Lord Melbourne often had cause to upbraid gently the young queen for her flightiness. She was, as yet, unmarried, although she was very much in love. Mr. Charles Dickens was serializing his novel Oliver Twist. Mr. Draper had just taken the first photograph of the moon, freezing her pale face on cold paper. Mr. Morse had just announced a way of transmitting messages down metal wires. Had you mentioned magic or fairy to any of them, they would have smiled at you disdainfully, except perhaps for Mr. Dickens, at the time a young man and beardless. He would have looked at you wistfully. People were coming to the British Isles that spring. They came in ones and they came in twos, and they landed at Dover or in London or in Liverpool. Men and women with skins as pale as paper, skins as dark as volcanic rock, skins the color of cinnamon, speaking in a multitude of tongues. They arrived all through April, and they traveled by steam trains, by horse, by caravan or cart, and many of them walked. At that time Dunstan Thorne was 18, and he was not a romantic. He had nut-brown hair, and nut-brown eyes, and nut-brown freckles. He was middling tall and slow of speech. He had an easy smile which illuminated his face from within, and he dreamed, when he daydreamed in his father's meadow, of leaving the village of Wall and its unpredictable charm, and going to London, or Edinburgh, or Dublin, or some great town where nothing was dependent on which way the wind was blowing. He worked on his father's farm and owned nothing save a small cottage in a far field given to him by his parents. Visitors were coming to Wall that April for the fair, and Dunstan resented them. Mr. Bromeo's inn, the 7th Magpie, normally a warren of empty rooms, had filled a week earlier, and now the strangers had begun to take rooms in the farms and private houses, paying for their lodgings with strange coins, with herbs and spices, and even with gemstones. As the day of the fair approached, the atmosphere of anticipation mounted. People were waking earlier, counting days, counting minutes. The guards on the gate at the sides of the wall were restive and nervous. Figures and shadows moved in the trees at the edge of the meadow. In the 7th Magpie, Bridget Comfrey, who was widely regarded as the most beautiful pot girl in living memory, was provoking friction between Tommy Forrester, with whom she had been seen to step out over the previous year, and a huge man with dark eyes and a small, chittering monkey. The man spoke little English, but he smiled expressively whenever Bridget came by. In the pub's tap room, the regulars sat in awkward proximity to the visitors, speaking so. "It's only every 9 years." They say in the old days it was every year at midsummer. Ask Mr. Bromios, he'll know. Mr. Bromios was tall, and his skin was olive. His black hair was curled tightly on his head. His eyes were green, and as the girls of the village became women, they took notice of Mr. Bromios. But he did not return their notice. It was said that he had come to the village quite some time ago, a visitor. But he had stayed in the village, and his wine was good, so the locals agreed. A loud argument broke out in the public lounge between Tommy Forrester and the dark-eyed man, whose name appeared to be Alam Bey. "Stop them! In the name of heaven, stop them!" shouted Bridget. "They're going out the back to fight over me." And she tossed her head prettily, so that the light of the oil lamps caught her perfect golden curls. Nobody moved to stop the men, although a number of people, villagers and newcomers alike, went out to spectate. Tommy Forrester removed his shirt and raised his fists in front of him. The stranger laughed and spat on the ground, and then seized Tommy's right hand and sent him flying onto the ground, chin first. Tommy clambered to his feet and ran at the stranger. He landed a glancing blow on the man's cheek before finding himself face down in the dirt, his face being slammed into the mud. With the wind knocked out of him, Alam Bey sat on top of him and chuckled, and said something in Arabic. That quickly and that easily the fight was over. Alam Bey climbed off Tommy Forrester, and he strutted over to Bridget Comfrey, bowed low to her, and grinned with gleaming teeth. Bridget ignored him and ran to Tommy. "Why, whatever has he done to you, my sweet?" she asked, and mopped the mud from his face with her apron, and called him all manner of endearments. Alam Bey went with the spectators back into the public rooms of the inn, and he graciously bought Tommy Forrester a bottle of Mr. Bromio's Chablis? Well, I don't know how to say that. I bet Aaron would. When Tommy returned, neither of them was quite certain who had won, who had lost. Dunstan Thorne was not in the Seventh Magpie that evening. He was a practical lad who had, for the last 6 months, been courting Daisy Hempstock, a young woman of similar practicality. They would walk on fair evenings around the village, and discuss the theory of crop rotation, and the weather, and other such sensible matters. And on these walks, upon which they were invariably accompanied by Daisy's mother and younger sister, walking a healthy 6 paces behind, they would, from time to time, stare at each other lovingly. At the door to the Hempstocks, Dunstan would pause and bow, and take his farewell, and Daisy Hempstock would walk into her house and remove her bonnet and say, "I do so wish Mr. Thorne would make up his mind to propose. I'm sure Papa would not be averse to it." "Indeed, I'm sure that he would not," said Daisy's mamma on this evening, as she said on every such evening, and she removed her own bonnet and her gloves and led her daughters to the drawing-room, in which a very tall gentleman with a very long black beard was sitting sorting through his pack. Daisy and her mamma and her sisters bobbed curtsies to the gentleman, who spoke little English and had arrived a few days before. The temporary lodger, in his turn, stood and bowed to them, then returned to his pack of wooden oddments, sorting, arranging, and polishing. It was chilly that April, with the awkward changing of English spring. The visitors came up the narrow road through the forest from the south. They filled the spare room. They bunked out in cow byres and barns. Some of them raised colored tents. Some of them arrived in their own caravans, drawn by huge gray horses or small, shaggy ponies. In the forest there was a carpet of bluebells. On the morning of April 29th, Dunstan Thorne drew guard duty at the gap in the wall, with Tommy Forrester. They stood on each side of the gap in the wall, and they waited. Dunstan had done guard duty many times before, but hitherto his task had consisted of simply standing and, on occasion, shooing away children. Today he felt important. He held a wooden cudgel And as each stranger to the village came up to the break in the wall, Dunstan or Tommy would say, "Tomorrow, tomorrow. No one's coming through today, good sirs." And the strangers would retreat a little way and stare through the break in the wall at the unassuming meadow beyond it, and at the unexceptional trees that dotted the meadow and the rather dull forest behind it. Some of them attempted to strike up a conversation with Dunstan or Tommy, but the young men, proud of their status as guards, declined to converse, contenting themselves by raising their heads, tightening their lips, and generally looking important. At lunchtime, Daisy Hempstock brought by a small pot of shepherd's pie for them both, and Bridget Comfrey brought them each a mug of spiced ale. And at twilight, another 2 able-bodied young men of the village arrived to relieve them, carrying a lantern each, and Tommy and Dunstan walked down to the inn where Mr. Bromios gave each of them a mug of his best ale. And his best ale was very fine indeed, as their reward for doing guard duty. There was a buzz of excitement in the inn, now crowded beyond believing. It was filled with visitors to the village from every nation in the world, or so it seemed to Dunstan, who had no sense of distance beyond the woods that surrounded the village of Wall. So he regarded the tall gentleman in the black top hat at the table beside him, all the way up from London, with as much awe as he regarded the taller, ebony-colored gentleman in the white one-piece robe with whom he was dining. Dunstan knew it was rude to stare, and that, as a villager of Wall, he had every right to feel superior to all of the foreigners. But he could smell unfamiliar spices on the air, and hear men and women speaking to each other in 100 tongues, and he gawked and gazed unashamedly. The man in the black silk top hat noticed that Dunstan was staring at him, and he motioned the lad over to him. "Do you like treacle pudding?" he asked abruptly, by way of introduction. "Mutanabi was called away, and there's more pudding here than a man can manage on his own." Dunstan nodded. The treacle pudding was streaming invitingly on its plate. "Well then," said his new friend, "help yourself." He passed Dunstan a clean china bowl and a spoon. Dunstan needed no further encouragement, and he began to demolish the pudding. "Now, young'un," said the tall gentleman in the black silk hat to Dunstan, once their bowls and the pudding plate were quite empty, "it seems the inn has no more rooms. Also, that every room in the village has already been let." "Is that so?" said Dunstan, unsurprised. "That it is," said the gentleman in the top hat. "And what I was wondering was, would you know of a house that might have a room?" Dunstan shrugged. "All the rooms have gone by now," he said. "I remember when I was a boy of 9, my mother and father sent me to sleep out in the rafters of the cow barn for a week, and let my room to a lady from the Orient, and her family and servants. She left me a kite as a thank you, and I flew it from the meadow until one day it snapped its string and flew away into the sky." "Where do you live now?" asked the gentleman in the top hat. "I have a cottage on the edge of my father's land," Dunstan replied. "It was our shepherd's cottage until he died 2 years ago, last Lammastide, and my parents gave it to me." "Take me to it," said the gentleman in the hat, and it did not occur to Dunstan to refuse him. The spring moon was high and bright, and the night was clear. They walked down from the village to the forest beneath it, and they walked the whole way past the Thorne family farm, where the gentleman in the top hat was startled by a cow sleeping in the meadow which snorted as it dreams, until they reached Dunstan's cottage. It had 1 room and a fireplace. The stranger nodded. "I like this well enough," he said. "Come, Dunstan Thorne, I'll rent it from you for the next 3 days." "What'll you give me for it?" "A gold sovereign, a silver sixpence, a copper penny, and a fresh shiny farthing," said the man. Now, a golden sovereign for 2 nights was more than fair rent, in the days when a farm worker might hope to make £15 in a good year. Still, Dunstan hesitated. "If you're here for the market," he told the tall man, "then it's miracles and wonders you'll be trading." The tall man nodded. "So It would be miracles and wonders that you'd be after, is it? He looked around Dunstan's one-room cottage again. It began to rain, a gentle pattering on the thatch above them. Come here, Isis. Oh, very well, said the tall man, a trifle testily. A miracle, a wonder. Tomorrow you shall attain your heart's desire. Now here is your money. And he took it from Dunstan's ear with one easy gesture. Dunstan touched it to the iron nail on the cottage door, checking for fairy gold. Then he bowed low to the gentleman and walked off into the rain. He tied the money up in his handkerchief. Dunstan walked to the cow byre in the pelting rain. He climbed into the hayloft and was soon asleep. He was aware in the night of thunder and lightning, although he did not wake, and then in the small hours of the morning he was woken by someone treading awkwardly on his feet. Sorry, said a voice. That is to say, excuse me. Who's that? Who's there? Said Dunstan. Just me, said a voice. I'm here for the market. I was sleeping in the hollow tree for the night, but the lightning toppled it. Cracked it like an egg, it did, and smashed it like a twig. And the rain got down my neck, and it threatened to get into my baggage, and there's things in there that must be kept dry as dust. And I'd keep it safe as houses on all my travelling things here, though it was wet as... Water? Suggested Dunstan. Ever so, continued the voice in the darkness. So I was wondering, it continued, if you'd mind me staying here under your roof, as I'm not very big, and I'd not disturb you or nothing. Just don't tread on me, said Dunstan. It was then that a flash of lightning illuminated the byre, and in the light Dunstan saw something small and hairy in the corner wearing a floppy hat, and then darkness. I hope I'm not disturbing you, said the voice, which certainly sounded rather hairy. Now Dunstan thought about it. You aren't, said Dunstan, who was very tired. That's good, said the hairy voice, because I wouldn't want to disturb you. Please, begged Dunstan, let me sleep, please. There was a snuffling noise which was replaced by a gentle snoring. Dunstan rolled over in the hay. The person, whatever it was, farted, scratched itself, and began to snore once more. Dunstan listened to the rain on the byre roof and thought about Daisy Hempstock, and in his thoughts they were walking together, and 6 steps behind them walked a tall man with a top hat and a small furry creature whose face Dunstan could not see. They were off to see his heart's desire. Alright guys, I'm going to stop it here, even though the first chapter is not done. We've been going for like 24 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and put a bookmark in, and we'll pick it up tomorrow. I hope you guys are listening, and I hope you guys are safe. And I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon.